tired of
dirty
platform that refuse to acknowledge white supremacy
in
geek culture.
Do you see?
A black nerd podcast.
That's not only covering
Nerdy topics such as
anime,
video game,
TV shows, and movies,
but also
Subjects black nerd they can relate to.
serve them.
Head on over to
world's first
Black nerd empowerment.
podcast.
Yeah.
Swarthy
Join
TV.
Guru.
on his
everlasting
Mission.
provide
and empowerment.
Most of us live inside a system we never built, but they shape every part of our lives. Today I'm unpacking the hidden architecture of white supremacy and its direct impact on black communities. I'll trace this system from its colonial foundation to today's headlines, showing how policies, culture, and even pop culture reinforce it. If you're interested in deep dives on history and nerd culture, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Let me get into it.
defining white
Supremacy.
Before I dive into the historical details, let me clarify what I mean by white supremacy. Many people say I'm not a white supremacist. I've got black friends, or I voted for a black candidate. But white supremacy isn't just a loud, torch-bearing neo-Nazi you might think of. In reality, it exists on a spectrum.
white extremists.
These are people who openly parade Nazi flags and chant racist slogans. A modern example is the August 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where self-identified neo-Nazi and Klan members gathered to decry black progress. That day ended in violent clashes and a fatal car attack when a white supremacist drove into a crowd of counter-protesters.
Covert white
supremacy.
These folks never wear Klan robes or carry torches. Instead, they champion school choice initiatives, framing them as giving families freedom while knowing that vouchers and charter expansions divert funds from underfunded public schools in majority black neighborhoods. They'll cloak this as improving education and knowing how it exacerbates existing disparities. In other words, they push policies under the guise of common sense, while those measured entrenched racial and economic segregation. Both extremes share a goal: to preserve white power and exclude black people from social, economic, and political influence. Understanding this spectrum is the first step towards dismantling the system.
Historic
foundation.
It starts in the colonial era, when black people were legally defined as property, a precedent for systematic dehumanization that involved rather than ended with the formal abolition of slavery. As early as 1662, Virginia passed a law enshrining partis sequitur ventrum, which decreed that any child born to an enslaved mother would also be enslaved, explicitly tying a person's status to race and ensuring that perpetual bondage of black families. By 1705, the Virginia House of Burgesses consolidated numerous statuses into the Virginia slave codes, detailing everything from restrictions on black movements to severe punishment for disobedience. Under these codes, black people were forbidden from owning property, moving freely without a white escort, or assembling in groups. White colonists were empowered to hunt, capture, and kill any black person who tried to escape, resisting bondage, with bounties often referred for runaways. In the early 1800s, national legislation further tightened control. A Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 and a stronger 1850 revision required that any black person, free or enslaved, who fled to a free state could be apprehended and returned to slavery. These laws criminalized escape itself and discouraged allies from intervening under threat of heavy fines. During the first half of the 19th century, scientific racism provided a veneer of legitimacy to these legal restraints. In 1851, Dr. Samuel A. Cartwright of Louisiana coined drapetomania, claiming that the only reason an enslaved person would flee captivity was because they suffered from mental illness rather than a rational desire for freedom. He even prescribed whipping as a cure, pathologizing resistance to bondage as a treatable disorder. Then came Jim Crow. Beginning in the late 19th century, Southern states passed black codes that criminalized everyday black life. Vagrancy, loitering, labor contracts became criminal offenses unique to black people, guaranteeing a steady supply of convict labor for white landowners and industries. Legal segregation followed in 1896 as Plessy v. Ferguson, mandating separate but equal facilities that were anything but equal. Schools, transportation, and public places were intentionally underfunded for black communities. By understanding how laws from Paratus to drapetomania were crafted specifically to dehumanize black people, you can see that white supremacy was never an accident. It was maliciously written in statutes, medical journals, and court rulings to protect a system of racial dominance.
Rape, hazing, and induction
into whiteness.
White supremacy didn't just target black people, it created a hierarchy that marginalized groups were coerced into climbing or fighting it. Once accepted as white, each group often adopted anti-black attitudes to prove their loyalty. Irish immigrants, the violent backlash, job riots, immigrant tenement, and school segregation, many Irish sought acceptance by aligning with white supremacy. In the 1863 New York draft riots, Irish mob attacked black neighborhoods, burning homes and lynching black residents to reinforce their own status above black people. Over time, Irish laborers joined segregated unions that excluded black workers and voted for segregationist politicians to cement their white status. Italian immigrants, facing nativist hostility and labeled unassailable in cities like New York and Chicago, many Italian laborers refused to work alongside black laborers, joined racially exclusive unions, and supported Jim Crow norms. In southern Texas, for instance, Italian employees in textile mills insisted on segregated workspaces and backed laws enforcing black disenfranchisement. Japanese Americans, though they themselves endured internment, Japanese Americans often reinforced local color lines after release. In part of the Pacific Northwest, especially Seattle, Japanese American homeowners signed restrictive covenants to bar black families from moving into their new neighborhoods. Japanese American owned businesses frequently refused to hire black employees, and community organizations sometimes opposed local civil rights initiatives aimed to desegregating schools and public places. Mexican origin communities, facing segregation in schools, expulsion, and racially motivated violence, Mexican origin activists formed LULAC to argue in court that Mexicans were legally white. Once courts desegregated facilities, many Mexican Americans still distanced themselves from black allies. In Texas and California, some Mexican-run businesses refused service to black patrons, seeking to preserve white privilege. But in the civil rights movement gained momentum, many LULAC chapters hesitated to join black-led protests, fearing that solidarity might jeopardize their own legal status as white. This dynamic, a communal hazing by pathway into whiteness, shows that white was constructed to fracture solidarity between black people and other racial minorities. Today, the system still allows other racial groups to succeed, but often at the expense of keeping black Americans as a permanent underclass. Many non-black minority-owned businesses cluster in predominantly black neighborhoods because capital and opportunity remain scarce elsewhere.
Building on how early the colonial elites created whiteness to divide the laboring classes, modern white supremacist elites still exploit that division. As Lyndon B. Johnson said in 1965, if you can't convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice that he's been clobbered by legislation. In other words, if working class whites believe their superiority, they'll overlook policies that harm them both. Since the Reagan era, conservative politicians use welfare queen rhetoric, portraying black single mothers as the cause of physical problems to justify cutting social programs that benefit poor and working class families of all races. Meanwhile, union jobs evaporated, wages stagnated, and the gap between rich and poor widened. Between 1979 and 2017, CEO compensations grew by 940%, while typical worker compensation grew only 12%. Yet polling shows many poor white voters supported candidates who championed tax cuts for the wealthy because those politicians promised to preserve their cultural status over black communities. In the Appalachia and the Rust Belt, poor white communities hit hardest by the factory closures were targeted by political messaging blaming takers, i.e. black residents. Despite data showing these regions lose jobs due to automation and corporate decisions, not welfare fraud. In 2016, exit polls found that 61% of white voters without a college degree supported Donald Trump, even though his policies like repealing the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid expansion would have harmed rural white populations disproportionately. This tactic, offering low-level white supremacists a sense of superiority over black people, ensures they never band together with black communities around shared economic grievances. Sometimes the clearest way to see a hidden system is through stories we already know. Let's look at a few pop culture analogies that reveal how white supremacy operates. Imagine Martin Luther King Jr. as Luke Skywalker, leading the movement, grounded in hope, justice, and community. Darth Vader becomes the face of white supremacy's machinery, powerful, intimidating, masked in neutral language, and constantly extending its control. Like Luke, Dr. King fought an empire of segregation, legal violence, and social control. He wasn't battling just a few bad apples. He stood against a system demanding total loyalty and punishing dissent. Darth Vader's helmet hides his human face. White supremacy hides behind colorblind laws, coded phrases, and the myth of objective fairness. When a black activist speaks truth to power, white supremacists label them rebels, causing trouble, just as the empire brands the rebel alliance Online, you'll notice concerned trolls who present themselves as defenders of true history, accusing Black Americans of exaggerating or inventing racism. They function like stormtroopers, policing any challenge to the status quo. When Black creators critique systematic racism, these empire loyalists demand proof, refuse to see evidence, or drop reverse racism labels, a tactic to protect white supremacy. In Star Wars terms, they deny the Death Star's existence, even as it vaporizes entire planets. Let's take it to the real world. Johnny Depp versus Jonathan Majors. When Amber Heard accused Johnny Depp of domestic violence, many popular YouTube channels instantly rallied behind Johnny Depp, dismissing Heard's claims and producing videos insisting he was innocent. Contrast that with spring 2023, when Black actor Jonathan Majors was accused of assault. Those same commentators refused to believe him, trending #FreeJonathanMajors, echoing Johnny Depp is innocent. Even as credible court testimony emerges, Majors' charges were ultimately dropped, but the online hostility towards Black victims remained stark. In The Matrix, Neo awakens from manufactured reality that keeps humans subjugated. White supremacy does something similar by feeding us myths, a post-racial meritocracy, and all men are created equal, while Black people remain tethered to underfunded schools, over-policed neighborhoods, and economic exclusion. Why these analogies matter? They show white supremacy as an interconnected system, not just isolated bad actors. When nerds deny systematic racism, they act as propagandists, protecting an illusion of virtue over confronting real struggles. Everyday manifestations today. These old systems didn't disappear, they morphed. Today, Black Americans face stark disparities across multiple domains. Black Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white Americans for similar offenses. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of the 1980s penalized crack cocaine, more common in Black communities, far more harshly than powder cocaine, predominantly used by white users. Those sentencing disparities fueled the prison pipeline. Public school budgets remain tied to local property taxes. Neighborhoods marked hazardous or redlined in the 1930s still see depressed property values today, resulting in underfunded schools, overcrowded classrooms, fewer resources, outdated materials. Black mothers in America are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white mothers. Each of these examples demonstrate how historical policy, segregation, redlining, discriminatory sentencing still produce racially disparate outcomes. At its core, white supremacy is about power controlling where people live, work, and even how dissent is handled. Consider many affluent suburbs use zoning regulations to ban multifamily housing, ensuring only single-family homes at high price points. This keeps Black families out of these communities, preserves property value, and maintains economic. White supremacist elites rely on the state's coercive force historically and today to enforce racial hierarchy. During Reconstruction, Southern militias and federal troops alike were deployed to suppress Black self-determination. In 1967, over 20,000 National Guard and Army troops descended on Detroit to squash uprisings sparked by systematic neglect and police brutality. In the late 1960s, the Los Angeles Police Department created the first Special Weapons and Tactics team, specifically to respond to urban rebellions and armed Black activist groups. After the 1965 Watts riots and facing armed resistance from Black Panther chapters, the LAPD formed SWAT in 1967 to counter what was characterized as Black extremist threats. This model spread nationwide, transforming policing into a paramilitary enterprise designed to contain and intimidate Black communities whenever they organized for justice. More recently, during the 2014 Ferguson unrest, local police deployed armed vehicles, sniper rifles, tear gas, and flashbang grenades against predominantly Black protesters, demanding justice after Mike Brown's killing. Throughout the 2010s, SWAT teams and the special response units fed by surplus military equipment were sent to Black neighborhoods under the guise of crime fighting, fueling a cycle of fear and containment rather than public safety. When Black communities organize or protest, that same military might is used to intimidate, disperse, and incarcerate, reinforcing the message that challenging white supremacy carries the threat of overwhelming force. These tactics rest on the same logic that created Jim Crow and redlining, ensuring Black Americans remain excluded and controlled through legal codes and armed power. Recognizing these patterns is the first step towards change. Consider the data. White crime rates underreporting. White individuals make up roughly 70% of adult arrests and 59% of violent crime arrests. White offenders also dominate property crime statistics like burglary and larceny. Yet white collar crimes, embezzlement, corporate fraud, insider trading generating hundreds of billions in financial losses annually, with only a small fraction leading to prosecution. When convictions occur, white collar defendants often receive more lenient sentences than individuals convicted of street crime. High profile cases like Bernie Madoff's $65 billion Ponzi scheme show how white offenders evade scrutiny for years, highlighting a double standard. Francis Cress Welsing described racism as a genocidal complex rooted in fear of genetic annihilation, a pathology requiring constant reinforcement. Neely Fuller Jr. defines racism not as individual prejudice, but a systematic power-based system of advantage, where color dictates who holds power and who is oppressed. Tariq Nasheed calls racism the original conspiracy theory, showing how myths and narratives bind white communities in a faith-like adherence to supremacy. When you see coded language like urban crime or dismiss factual evidence of racial disparities, that's the covert form of white supremacy in action. Naming it is how you begin to dismantle it. If white people remain silent while white supremacist violence continues unchecked, the harm eventually boomerangs back onto the white community themselves. Malcolm X warned, the chicken will come home to roost.
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing. Climate of hate means that this is the result of something.
Most white Americans do not live in majority black neighborhoods. So when a white supremacist attacks a black person, local white communities may feel insulated until that hate turns inward. Once radicalized, violence becomes too visible. Having nowhere else to channel their hate, redirected towards other white targets. Schools, movie theaters, shopping malls, all white public spaces become substitute targets. Over the past decade, mass shootings at predominantly white venues have surged. Instead of labeling them white supremacist attacks, the media often calls them lone wolf incidents, obscuring the underlying ideology. The same commentators who downplay white supremacist violence become outraged when black people protest racial injustice, labeling them violent agitators or demanding law and order. This double standard perpetuates white supremacy. When white people excuse or defend white supremacists, they tactically condone the ideology that will ultimately harm them. Each time you call out white supremacist behavior, whether it's hate crimes in a black neighborhood or a mass shooting at a white school, that voice chips away at the system of legitimacy. Silence or complicity allows the ideology to metastasize, eventually harming everyone. In the face of pervasive silence, you might ask, are there any good white people? Indeed, there have been and are white individuals who risk everything to stand with black communities. In 1676, Nathaniel Bacon led a rare multiracial uprising in Virginia, Bacon's Rebellion, bringing together poor white and poor black against Governor William Berkeley, who favored wealthy planters. When these poor whites and blacks stood together, the planter elite panicked. Suppressing Bacon's rebellion, the Virginia House of Burgesses passed laws in 1677 and 1680 defining white persons as those not of African descent, ensuring poor whites would identify with their oppressors rather than unite with black. That legal definition of white granted privileges, small land grants, easier access to courts, effectively fracturing alliance between poor whites and poor blacks, and undercutting future multiracial coalitions. Nathaniel Bacon's alliance with black laborers and his revolt against economic injustice made him a one-time positive example until authorities created race-based division to prevent similar rebellion. Nearly 3 centuries later, Gary Webb refused to stay silent about a scandal that devastated black communities. In 1996, he published the Dark Alliance series in the San Jose Mercury News, exposing how the CIA-backed Contras helped smuggle crack cocaine into black neighborhoods in Los Angeles to fund the Contra War in Nicaragua. Webb documented how Contra-affiliated dealers sold large quantities of cocaine in black neighborhoods, then laundered profits to support rebel forces in Nicaragua. He highlighted figures like Freeway Rick Ross, whose crack empire took root in South Central LA. Ross later claimed his dealers had ties to Nicaraguan traffickers protected by the CIA. Major news outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times publicly attacked Webb's reporting, accusing him of poor sourcing. The Mercury News ultimately distanced itself from his series, leaving Webb isolated and under intense pressure. On December 10th, 2004, Webb was found dead from 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, officially ruled a suicide. Many believe foul play cannot be ruled out. His death remains controversial. Regardless, he paid a steep price, his career, reputation, and possibly his life, for exposing a scandal that targeted black community. Gary Webb's commitment to truth despite professional blacklisting and personal risks make him a singular example of a white ally who risked and may have lost everything. In August 2017, Heather Heyer, a 32-year-old white woman, was killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, when a self-identified white supremacist drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters at the Unite the Right rally. Heyer had come out to defend her black friends and fellow activists against neo-Nazi violence. On August 12, 2017, James Alex Fields Jr. drove his Dodge Challenger into a group of peaceful counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer and injuring 19 others. Her death underscored that white supremacists will not hesitate to kill not only black people, but also white allies who stand up for racial justice. It's a stark reminder that white supremacists are prepared to target anyone of any race who challenges their ideology. These 3 figures, Nathaniel Bacon's ill-fated multiracial rebellion, Gary Webb's tireless investigating and reporting, and Heather Heyer's fatal stand, showed that white people have risked everything, even their lives, to challenge white supremacy. Their actions prove that if your white allies speak up, the system's foundation begins to crack. Next, let's focus on Tariq Nasheed, an outspoken activist and filmmaker who has used his platform to expose white supremacy. In April 2011, Nasheed released his first documentary, Hidden Colors: The Untold History of People of Aboriginal, Moor, and African Descent, to spotlight how black history has been marginalized and erased. The documentary included interviews from scholars like Frances Cress Welsing, arguing that Africans circumnavigated the globe before Europeans and that ancient Asian dynasties had black roots. Many viewers credit Hidden Colors with sparking grassroots study groups, local screenings, and a surge of online discussion about reparation, black history, and the term woke. In June 2018, white supremacists placed a false 911 call to have him swatted, a dangerous prank that sent police to his house.
Officers creeped toward the home of Tariq Nasheed. He was sound asleep when police first tried to make contact by telephone.
They said, "This is the police. You need to come outside. What are you wearing?" So I hung up again. I'm like, that sounds weird.
A fourth call sent Nasheed to his front door.
I looked out the front door and there's people with guns pointed at me.
He called the police back and was advised to go outside with his ID.
They were told that there was bombs in the house and I had my wife kidnapped and tied up, and there was just a whole thing they made up. And again, the police kind of suspected that it could have been a swatting thing.
Swatting is when someone makes a false report to police, prompting an emergency response.
A lot of stuff we want to talk about tonight.
Nasheed is a popular figure on YouTube and has produced a series of documentaries about blacks in America.
Anytime you talk about racial injustice, that's going to make you a target. Going back and Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Dr. King.
He believes white supremacists are behind the swatting, the same ones that troll him online and have sent police on false reports to his public speaking events. This, though, is the first time he's been targeted at home and involved his wife and child. Nasheed remained cool but questions why he was handcuffed when police already suspected this was a bogus call.
They were actually good guys, and I take my hat off to them. They were very professional. But what if they weren't, though? You know, that's a dangerous situation to put somebody in, especially a person, a black American, in this day and age where you can be killed with impunity.
On YouTube, self-identified white supremacist commentators often trash Nasheed's channel, calling him anti-white or accusing him of peddling lies, despite his extensive citations of academic work. If you suspect a channel is white supremacist, search for negative clips about Tariq Nasheed. If most videos dismiss him as anti-white, that's a strong signal you're dealing with supremacist content. Everything Nasheed advocates, challenging the system of white supremacy with the system of justice, is rooted in the simple principle that no one should be oppressed because of skin color. By centering black voices, documenting hidden histories, and pushing for global solidarity, Nasheed's work continues to challenge the status quo. His fearless critique reminds me that if I don't study white supremacy's roots, I can't dismantle its branches. White supremacy isn't just extremist groups. It's woven into our laws, economies, pop culture, and everyday life. But awareness plus action can reshape these systems. Which examples resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this video helped you see something in a new light, like, share, and subscribe for more insight. See you in the next one.
In the hood, but I'm doing so good. Flip the stereotypes that you would. Rhyme sicker than your average figure. Black and I'm proud, just a smart nerd, mister. Late nights coding, science fiction dreams. In the lab, you know I'm cracking schemes. Not just the streets, but the stars I explore. Paving paths like never before. Battling ignorance, tearing down lies. A warrior for justice in a nerd's disguise. With every code I write, with every rhyme I spit, I'm dismantling systems, brick by brick.